CBS Television presents a special report on Sputnik 1, the Soviet space satellite. Douglas Edwards reporting.
The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union began with Sputnik 1, the first satellite to orbit the Earth in October 1957. The U.S. quickly responded with the satellite Explorer 1.
Meanwhile, far across the country at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a sprawling 80-acre research and development complex in Pasadena, California, scientists and engineers were racing toward the same deadline: 90 days to put a satellite into orbit. Their job, furnish the...
Just a few years later, in 1961, the Soviet pilot Yuri Gagarin became the first human to leave our planet, completing one full orbit before falling back to Earth.
I'd like to know what psychological disturbances, if any, have resulted in Major Gagarin's spaceflight. Does he ever have nightmares, feeling that he is
Less than a month after that, Alan Shepard flew into space for the U.S., and 3 weeks after that, President John F. Kennedy extended the space race far beyond Earth's orbit, all the way to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
While such details of the space race are common knowledge, what's not as well known is that this competition extended even farther beyond the moon, to the planet Mars.
For centuries, science has studied Mars, the only planet where life may exist. Now the screen creates for you the fascinating, frightening spectacle of the first flight to Mars.
As depicted through the rosy lens of science fiction sagas like the 1951 movie Flight to Mars, the Red Planet was a place of romance and peril, where heroes encountered bizarre creatures, or more human-like Martians. Scientists in the real world were keen to discover whether Mars actually could be a haven for alien life. Here's JPL engineer Gentry Lee.
For many, many years, most of the scientists believed that if there was any life elsewhere in our solar system, the most likely candidate for that life was Mars. And the rationale went something like this. Venus is way too hot. The surface is 900 degrees Fahrenheit, 400 degrees centigrade. The atmosphere has sulfuric and hydrochloric acid. No life's going to be there, at least not any life, anything like we know. Mars, on the other hand, we knew that water was cycling between a gaseous and a solid phase there. So, given that water was essential for life, we focused on Mars.
The first 6 attempts to reach Mars with robotic spacecraft, 5 by the Soviet Union and 1 by the US, failed. But then NASA had success in 1964, when Mariner 4 flew past Mars while snapping the closest images ever taken of its surface. That began a string of Mariner flybys. And then in 1971, Mariner 9 became the first spacecraft to orbit Mars, rather than just fly past it. The Soviet Union's Mars program, meanwhile, continued to struggle throughout the 1960s. But its 10th attempt, the Mars 3 spacecraft, circled the planet 20 times, arriving just 2 weeks after Mariner 9. The Mars 3 mission scored a first, though, by sending a lander with the rover down to the Martian surface. Although the touchdown went as planned, the lander only transmitted for a few seconds, sending one static-filled, almost abstract image, and didn't operate long enough to release the rover it held inside. NASA at this time was preparing to send its own orbiter and lander combo to Mars, Viking 1, followed a few weeks later by the twin Viking 2. Gentry was on the Viking team.
In the 1970s, when we were building the Viking spacecraft, we were, all of us, scared to death that we would fail because of all the things we did not know about Mars.
While scientists had a better understanding of Mars thanks to the Mariner missions, many important details were hazy, and flying through the planet's atmosphere to attempt a landing was still a dangerous dive into the unknown.
The atmospheric representations that we were given to design Viking varied by as much as 3 orders of magnitude. We did not know anything about the terrain. As a matter of fact, a good 20% of the scientists on Viking thought that the surface of Mars might be the consistency of rapid shave. And everybody always asks me, why did you take that stupid first picture of the footpad that landed on Mars? And I said, because 20% of the scientists thought we were going to go glub, glub, glub.